Okay, so I was asked by some people at the SpaceMax chat room to record a video about how I use SpaceMax. So this is what I'm attempting to do here. Um, I will try to show my favorite features and key bindings from the SpaceMax distribution, which means that I don't want to touch anything that is very specific to particular programming languages. So I'm going to try to stay very generic and general. I'm also going to show you a couple of layers that I like to use, but again, most of the layers are specific to certain programming languages, which I will not touch, at least not in this video. Um, but I'm going to show you a few of the other ones. This is not going to be a tutorial on how to use SpaceMax. There are other people who do tutorials. I will try to put a link in the video description to some videos about that. But that doesn't mean that new users to SpaceMax won't find this video beneficial. If you're new to SpaceMax, or if you're just curious about SpaceMax, even if you come from Vim or even Emacs or any other editor, I'm sure you will find something in this video that's enlightening to you. Um, and lastly, before we get started, I just want to say that I don't consider myself to be a power user. Um, there are a lot of features in SpaceMax that I don't use, um, but I happen to know a lot about SpaceMax, so I hope that I can maybe point a few things out for you anyway. I do spend a lot of time programming, both at work and for fun, mostly in Python, C++, and Emacs Lisp, of course, because I do contribute a lot to SpaceMax, and to do that you have to write Emacs Lisp. I spent 7 years using Vim, about 2007 to May 2014, at which point I switched to using Emacs and Evil mode. And then I maintained my own Emacs configuration for about a year until April this year, 2015, where I switched to SpaceMax. I had tried using SpaceMax in January and found it a little bit wanting, a little bit hard to get into. It's a very opinionated framework, and it's a little bit hard to tell how to configure it yourself, at least to begin with. So I was put off initially, but then I came back 4 or 5 months later, um, and I knew a bit more about Lisp, so I was able to get into it then. Not going to lie, it is a little bit of work if you want to configure your own SpaceMax configuration, but I think it pays off, and it's not as hard as it used to be. So I hope that with this video I can convince you that it might just be worth it. So this is what the SpaceMax startup screen looks like. There are some buttons on the top here. There are the release notes, for which there's nothing at the moment. I'm now running the development version of SpaceMax, which means that I don't have any release notes right now. I updated just this morning, so some of the features that I'm going to show you are really, really fresh. So please consider whether or not you want to use the development version or the master version. So yeah, below the changelog there are some lists here. There's a list of 5 recent files, some bookmarks which I don't really use, but I really should do that more, and then a bunch of projects that you have recently visited. Um, to begin with, I'm going to show you my dot file. Now I press space WV to split my screen, space WL to go to the right one, space FED to open my dot file. Now this file by default is in your home directory, and it contains a bunch of variables and settings which you really want to check out when you start with SpaceMax. I'm going to briefly go through them here, um, not because I want to show you all of them, but because I want you to have a certain idea about what's different between my SpaceMax and the default SpaceMax. So there are 4 functions defined in this file. First one is called .spacemax layers, and it contains a list of layers that you want to enable. That's this list here. A layer is a unit of configuration that you can turn on or off. To begin with, you get the basic SpaceMax configuration and 2 layers that are enabled by default. And then you can add more, and you will want to do that. This is the list of layers that I'm using. Here you see C, C++, Clojure, C#, extra languages, Git, HTML, so on. You can enable a layer just by listing it right here, or you can put it in a parenthesized list like this, um, with some extra configuration here, if the layer supports it. I'm going to go through some of these layers later on. Until then, I'm just going to neatly skip past here. This is some layers that I use on my Linux computer, but which I don't use on my Windows setup. They are typically layers that depend on external executables that I haven't installed on Windows for whatever reason, because they don't exist, or because it's difficult, or because I just don't care. Um, so, so these are not available on my Windows computer. Additionally, there are some layers here, which I've written myself. Um, there's a GitHub repository with my personal layers. I will link it in the description so you can have a look at it. Most of these are considered to be sort of usable by everybody, so if you want to use them, you can do that. It's not a problem. Additionally, in that repository are these 2 layers, which are more personal. They contain my own personal configuration, which you may agree with or disagree with. Um, but of course, if you happen to find yourself agreeing with it, you can use that as well. The second function in your dot file is called .spacemaxinit, and it is responsible for setting a bunch of variables called .spacemax variables. These are these variables represent configurations which are very common to make, and we want to make it easy for people to change these. So whenever we find such a thing, we introduce a dot file variable, and that makes it easy for people to configure it. What you want to look out for here is particularly this one, the .spacemax editing style. It can be equal to Vim or hybrid or Emacs. Since I'm a Vimmer, I like to stay with the Vim editing style. If you come from the Emacs world, you might consider setting this to Emacs. Or if you are adventurous, you can try the hybrid mode, which is basically just Vim, except you can use Emacs keybindings in insert state instead of the Vim keybindings. Let me see, did I change any others? Yes, this is the .spacemax startup banner. So by default, when you boot up SpaceMax, you will get a big image here with the SpaceMax logo. It takes a lot of space, and I've seen it 100 times, so I turned this off by setting .spacemax startup banner to nil. .spacemax startup lists. This is a list of things that you want to show in your home buffer right here. You can show bookmarks, projects, and recent files, and I've turned them all on. I think by default one of these are off. I don't quite remember which one though. .spacemax themes. When you start SpaceMax, or when you start using SpaceMax, this is one of the first places you will want to go. Everybody has an opinion on their theme, and I'm no exception. I really like Monokai. That's the theme you're looking at right now. There's a few others here that I have installed, which I can switch to using a key binding space capital T N. But usually I just stick with Monokai. I like it a lot. The default font is something you will want to change probably. The default is Source Code Pro, which I happen to agree is an amazing font. It's also the one you're looking at right now. I tend to like to make it a little bit bigger on Windows because my Windows computer is small and has a small screen with a very high resolution, so I like to have bigger fonts there. Uh, for the rest, they are mostly defaults, except this one. Uh, it changes the behavior of capital Y, in which, if you come from the Vim world, you may be familiar with the. It's a sort of a divisive issue, but it's details, and I don't want to go into details right now. Other than that, these are mostly defaults, I think. Except this one. Yeah, mode line Unicode symbols. So if you look down at the mode line here, you can see this is the list of minor modes I have enabled. Usually these are shown in these pretty Unicode symbols, it's like a circle with a Y in it instead of this Y. But I find those too small, too hard to read, so I've turned them off by setting this variable here, mode line Unicode symbols, to nil. Other than that, this is all default. Nice. The third function in your dot file is this one called .spacemax user init. It runs at the same time .spacemax init runs, but it's reserved basically for setting your own variables. So here I have a bunch of stuff from my old configuration, which I probably could remove. I suppose most of these are set by SpaceMax, but I haven't yet spent time to figure out which are safe to remove and which are not. Evil shift round. This is a variable that I really recommend you set to nil. The default value is true, which is just terrible. It's a terrible default. Uh, Evil shift, that refers to the functionality you get when you hit the angle brackets in Vim, but you shift a line like this. Now my evil shift width is set to 4, so whenever I hit double angle brackets, the line indents by 4 in either direction. However, if I set evil shift round to true, it will round to the nearest multiple of 4. So now this line is indented by 3. If I now hit angle brackets, it jumps 1 to the left to 4, and if I hit angle brackets again, it'll jump to 8. But I can't bring it back to 3 by using angle brackets now. And I find this to be a really useless default. Um, so let's bring that back to true. White space mode, this comes in handy every now and then, but I find the default settings for these are kind of useless. So these are mine. Feel free to copy them if you like. This is useful, for example, if you have a file that contains literal tab characters. Let me see here. Let me try to type a literal tab. There you go. Now here you have a tab character, but unless your cursor is on it, it's kind of hard to tell. You can toggle white space mode on using space TW. That will show you this arrow indicating that this is a tab. And I can add a few more to really drive the point home here. So I like this. Smart parents. This is the functionality that adds these auto closing pairs. They will tend to highlight when you add them, and I don't like that, so I turn off that with these variables. And then come a few other settings here relating to layers that I'm going to show you later. These are just specifics, so let's skip that. Theme modifications. This is something that most people want to do. Themes are large, they are awkward, and they're typically, I mean, you may like it, but still there are some things you want to change. So I've written a layer for changing them, or for modifying them, and this is my settings for faces that I like to change. Um, this is not a stock SpaceMax feature. It's one of my own personal layers. It's not difficult to do this even without that layer, but I think it adds a little bit of convenience. Um, so you may want to check that out. I'm not going to go into details about that. Lastly, there's probably the most important function in your dot file. That's the user config file. It runs at the end after anything else, which means basically if you want to set a variable, or if you want to run some code or whatever to change something, 99% of the time this is where you want to do it. Here I define some utility functions, I set some variables which I need to overwrite. Basically, if SpaceMax sets these variables and you want to change the value, you have to do it in your config function, because otherwise your setting is just going to be overwritten by SpaceMax. Um, so there are some settings that I have here. Some of my own key bindings, plus and underscore for increasing numbers. So if I write 2 here, I can just plus or minus to decrease it. This launches me into a SpaceMax numbers microstate, which is kind of handy. Um, backslash, I use this for finding in reverse. So Vim and Evil has this sort of jump function on a line. So if I press FR, I jump to the next R, and I can repeat this with semicolon. It jumps to the next R and the next one. And by default, if you want to go back, you can use comma. But comma in SpaceMax is used for something else, and there's no binding for this reverse thing. So I bound this to backslash, so I can use backslash to go back. These two bindings, they are my customizations for the unimpaired layer, which I will talk about a little bit later. But basically, they insert white space to the left or the right of the current character. These come in handy a few times. Backspace launches Smex. This is the Emacs equivalent um, of the uh, of the Vim X command line, which you get if you type a colon. Um, but Smex really is nice. I like it a lot, and I have I launch it typically with backspace. By default, it is space colon, but that's a little bit awkward to type, so I like to use backspace. Then I have a few other keys here. Fly check clear, yeah, just one space. That one's nice. If I have a lot of white space between two things here, I can press space OS, and I will just get one white space. And these you don't need to know about. Control W in company, yeah, this one is nice. So Control W is a key binding that I use a lot. It kills a word backwards in insert state. So if I write a word, I can press Control W to kill it. Now, by default, this doesn't work if there is an auto-completion pop-up there, because company shadows that key binding, but this makes it work anyway. So that's really nice for me. Some other configurations I made: autofill mode in text modes. Let me bring up a text mode buffer here, just so you can see. So yeah, this takes a little time. Okay, so basically it just wraps long lines, right? So Long lines get wrapped by default. Great. I like that a lot in text modes, not in programming modes. So that's why I have it here in the text mode hook. Uh, Deer, that's part of the Ranger layer. The red mode, that's the basic, or that's the default directory navigation function in Emacs, and it's nice, but deer is better. So if I add deer to the red mode hook, I get deer wherever I would usually get the red, which is quite handy. Like I said, you need the ranger layer for this to work, and I will show you that later. White space mode, I want that on in makefiles because you have to indent by tabs in makefiles. This is typically done for you by default, but I like to get some visual feedback that this is happening. Um, Diminish, yeah, this is not interesting. Um, show smart parents global mode. So this is a features that if your cursor is on one bracket, it'll highlight the other one. Um, this really gets in the way after a while, and yeah, this is how I disable it. Yeah, this is not interesting. Uh, Command line style buffers. So yeah, so some buffers they are command line style, like shells, like IRC clients, like REPLs and so on. They behave like command lines, and in order to make them look or behave like I want, first I make them open in normal state. Typically, these kinds of buffers open in insert state, but I like to have it make it predictable whether or not a buffer is in insert or normal state at any given time. So new buffers always in normal state. At least that's my opinion. In addition, I have turned off the global highlight mode, or sorry, the global highlight line mode. That's the mode that makes the current line highlighted, but in a command line buffer that really doesn't look good. So let me um, turn that on here just to show you what I mean. If I type something here, you can see that it's highlighted, but not until the end, and this just looks silly to me. So let me kill that. So I like to turn that off. In addition, I like to turn off the scroll margin. So by default, if you scroll to the end of the buffer, there's a certain context of 5 lines. So you're not allowed to go closer to the edge of the buffer or the edge of the visible area here by 5 lines. But that's of course useless in a command line style buffer where you want to be at the bottom, right? Like this. Hi. So so I turned that off in that buffer. There's some org bindings. That's fine. LaTeX. I'll have to move this to a separate layer at some point. IRC. This is not interesting. The powerline default separator is this one. I like it. Takes a bit less space than the default one in SpaceMax. Evilified. This is stuff you don't need to know about. These are some additional package configuration, which you also don't need to know about. This is a nice trick, I find. Sometimes I need to have a different configuration on different computers. So this basically just loads a local file if it exists. So that's my way of doing that. So that's my dot file. I'm now going to show you some of the features that I use most often in SpaceMax. Um, and to do that, I first have to talk a little bit about Helm. Helm is this sort of completion framework. It pops up in the bottom of the screen, at least by default. There's a setting you can use to change that, and you can navigate through it with Control J, and up with Control K, and you can select something with Control L. That's usually the binding I like to use because it's close to Control J and K. You can also, of course, use Return or Tab, like that. Um, so if you use SpaceMax at all, you have to know Helm. It's really nice. What I brought up here is Helm Mini. It's bound to Space BB, and this is what I use mostly to switch between buffers. Here you have first on the top a list of open buffers, and here below it there's a list of recent files. Um, so usually whenever I want to open a file, it's somewhere in this list. I can type, for example, plib, and there you go. There's plib.py at the top. This is a file that I visited a lot. So this is quite nice. Um, Another thing you need to know about Helm is that you can press Ctrl Z, and this shows a list of actions. The 12 first ones are typically bound to the F1 to F12, and there's a few others with other key bindings here. So Helm can do a lot more than just open a buffer, right? You can control space to mark things, and let's say I want to delete those buffers. I can press Control Z here to see kill buffer. That's Alt capital D. So if I Alt capital D here, then I will delete those buffers. But I don't want to do that right now. So yeah, so make sure. I see this a lot on the chat room. People ask me, can I do this and that from Helm? Well, typically, if you press Ctrl Z and you look through the options, you will find out. The answer may be yes or no, but you will know pretty quickly. For opening files, the quintessential binding is space FF. This opens a file navigator. You can use Ctrl H to go up a folder. You can use Ctrl L to go into a folder. And you can hit enter to open a file. Another thing you can do is space PF. That opens this list of all the files in a project. This is probably the closest thing you have to Control P in Emacs. Control P is a popular Vim plugin, and it does something similar to that. It works the same from any file in that project. It always opens at the root. It's really nice. And a project, by the way, is defined by typically by a source control configuration like .git or .svn or .mercurial or whatever. But if you use projects that are not source controlled, you can make them into projects as well by defining a .projectile file. So projectile is the name of the plugin that provides this project functionality. It's really nice. If you want to open a file in a different project, you can use space pp and then switch to a project like evil, and that opens space pf for the evil project. And there are still a list of projects here at the bottom, which is this is a really nice way to open files, I've seen. In addition to this, as mentioned, space bb has a list of recent files. So this should suffice for most of your opening file needs. I should mention though that the list of projects in space pp, you have to open a file in a project for projectile to remember that project. There is a way to get projectile to know about projects without opening a file in them first, but typically that's how I do it. So the first time you open a file in a project, you have to use space ff, and after that you can use space pf and space pp. For searching, space / is really nice. It searches through a whole project. Let me open the SpaceMax source code here. I can search for SpaceMax in it, which is predictably going to bring up 4,400 candidates. um, and you can just look through here. This is done by AG by default. There's a variable here. Let me see right here. .spacemax search tools. You can choose which one you like the most. So I like AG, so AG is first here. Um, so that's what I use for searching in projects. You can also the default here is to take whatever you are looking at on the cursor and fill the prompt with that value. You can avoid that by doing space and then S for search, A for ag, and then P for project. And that basically does the same feature except it doesn't fill the prompt. So I use both of them. For searching in a file, I use Helm swoop space SS. It opens here sort of a copy of your file, and then if you type something like evil, it shows you only the lines that contain evil, and it highlights which part of the line contains evil. And like elsewhere in Helm, you can Control J and Control K to move in this list, and the buffer that you are searching in will update to show you the context. And let me see, evilification. Yeah, so let me look up evilification. Let me type more evilif. Okay, and that shows me just the 3 lines in the whole buffer that has evilification. This is a really convenient feature. It by default in Vim you can use / and then search like normally, like this. But I find the Helm swoop feature a lot more powerful and a lot more convenient. So I'm trying to train myself to use that. Additionally, there's a nice tool called Helm semantic or iMenu. So let me just open a file here with a lot of functions in it, like this one. So if I now press space SL, I get a list here of all definitions in this file, which I can also search in. So let me see, like this one, for example, and it brings me right to the function. You should enable the semantic layer if you use this feature a lot, because it makes it a bit more powerful. So that's searching. For jumping between windows, I use space W and then HJKL to move left, right, up and down. Typically my windows are just split in 2 like this, so space WH and space WL, they are typically everything that I need. Sometimes, at least at work, I have multiple monitors and I have one window open on each monitor. Then I use space W space to move between them. So let me see here. Try to demonstrate. Okay, now I have 2 windows. Now if I type space W space, it all goes gray except there's a letter at the top left of each window. And I can press that letter to jump to that window. So if I press A, I will go here. Space A, and then S, and then I end up here. D, and then I end up there. So as you can tell, this can bring you across frames, or across windows as they're called in normal speak. I don't have to mess about with Alt Tab or any of that stuff to jump across windows. So that's really nice. Space L, you can use this to jump to a line. It shows you, it highlights each line in particularly the same manner. So if I want to jump to this line, I can press YW, space L. I want to jump back here. That's YU, and so on. This is really handy. And let me search here. Avi. You should set avial windows to all frames, in my opinion. Then you can use these jumping features to jump across frames instead of just in the same frame or in the same buffer. This makes them extremely powerful features. Um, a few other key bindings I like to use for compilation: space C capital C, and then it prompts you to enter a compilation command. So typically my compilation commands have to begin with a change directory, blah 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 blah, and then make. Um, and then after that you can use space CR to rerun the same compilation. There are some features to make this more handy, but that's what I use still right now. I need to look into those, I think. Um, Space V is what is called expand region. It really is easy to show you, more easy to show you than it is to explain. Let me see, space V, and then I can press V to expand this region like this, and capital V to contract. And this is just visual state, basically. It's really handy. For editing, usually the rule of thumb is that Vim bindings work, and that's what I go by. I edit in SpaceMax pretty much like I would in Vim. We have brought in some plugins that are common in Vim, like Tim Pope's Surround. We use a port of that to Emacs, so you can do things like select a symbol, S, bracket, and then you get parentheses around there, and so on. So this is really cool. Another thing is multiple cursors, which is very popular in Sublime Text. There is an implementation of multiple cursors for Emacs, but unfortunately it is very incompatible with Evil, so SpaceMax doesn't use that by default. On the other hand, there is work being done to bring that into SpaceMax, so hopefully in a few months that will be different. On the other hand, we do have IEdit, which does something similar. So let me see, here I have add hook. So if I now press space SE, it selects all the add hooks. I can do N to jump between them. Let me see here. Space SE, I can use N and capital N to jump between them. And if I edit one of them, the others change as well. So this is basically what we have in Emacs for multiple cursors. Let me look at my list here. For help, you really need to know SpaceHD, which stands for help describe. You can press space HDF to describe function. It brings you a list of functions. Spacemax Emacs version OK, and it shows you some info about that function. Now this one was not very interesting. Let me see. Yeah, it shows you here a documentation about a function. This is really handy if you write any amount of Emacs Lisp. You can do the same with variables. Space HDV brings you a list of variables, then you can look each of them up, and you can even check their value here. Its value is nil. This is extremely handy. There's a lot more under space HD, like K, space HDK for describe key. Then you can enter a key binding, space HD key, space HDK, sorry, and then it tells you what function that key binding runs. Really cool. And there's a lot of other things here. Describe package, describe mode, describe system info. If you ever make a bug report to SpaceMax, please include the output of SpaceHDs for us. That is really handy. Uh, describe bindings. B here, SpaceHDB, shows you a list of all the key bindings available in the current context. If you ever find yourself in insert state and you want to check out a key binding, but you find yourself unable to enter space, of course, because space in insert state just enters a space, the same function is available under Control H K, describe key, and then you can verify for yourself that space runs the command self insert command. Other ways to get help: space F1. That is just commands, functions, classes, functions, variables, phases, etc., etc., in one Helm completion buffer, and you can search among all of them at the same time. Um, and I need to also mention space FEH. If you ever need to find stuff in SpaceMax, this opens a Helm buffer that has all the SpaceMax documentation files. It has a list of layers. It has a list of packages here, saying basically that the layer autocompletion includes the package, company, Helm CER snippet, and so on. It has a list of dot file variables, and it has a list of toggles, things you can toggle, and then also a list of frequently asked questions, and all of this in the same buffer. So this is extremely handy. You have to know how to use this if you want to use SpaceMax. Space FEH, I would not live without it. Um, so that basically brings me to the end of the list of features that I wanted to highlight. This list is not exhaustive, of course. I probably use a whole bunch of other things. Um, and I'm sure that the minute that I stop recording, I will find 100 things that I wanted to highlight, but this will do for now, and I guess in a different video I can go into more details. To finish this video, I wanted to show you a few layers. So these are my layers. Many of them are about programming languages, which I mentioned I do not want to highlight right now, but there are a few other things. First of all is the autocompletion layer, um, which is really nice. If you've ever tried to configure autocompletion in Vim or stock Emacs, you'll know that it takes a lot of work. And in SpaceMax, this is still not perfect, but it's pretty much as close to perfect as I like. So just to show it in action here, this is company mode. It shows a list of completions. It's really handy. Press Ctrl J, Ctrl K to move up and down this list. And I typically use Ctrl L to complete, or if I want to search in a fuzzy manner, I can press Ctrl / and that drops up a Helm buffer where I can search like this. It's really handy. Um, Another thing in the auto completion layer are snippets, which are expanded using Alt / by default. So here's a function definition. My function, argument 1, argument 2, and so on. I don't know what happened here. I must have done something wrong. But anyway. Let me see here. Syntax checking. This uses the venerable flycheck package to perform syntax checking. I have enabled it I have disabled it by default because it usually, I find that it gets in my way, but it's nice to have it there. if I ever need it. So I can turn it on using space TS, and that shows me a list. There's 36 warnings in this buffer because, well, the syntax checker for Emacs Lisp isn't very useful really. It shows me a lot of warnings about unbound variables and so on, but in macros that doesn't really matter. So uh, so yeah, there's a limited use in Emacs Lisp, but in certain other programming languages this is really handy. Most of the bindings for this you can find under space E. So space EL, for example, to pop open a list, and then you can browse through here, much like you did in Helm swoop, to go to an error, or space N to go to the next error, space EP to go to the previous one. Um, Let me see. Space ES to select the checker, or space EV to verify the setup. It shows you basically which checkers are available in this buffer, whether they can be used or whether the executable is locatable, and so on. This is a very nice way to debug your flight check setup. But right now I don't want to use flight check, so I will turn it off with space TS. Um, Another layer I like to use is eyebrows. A lot of Vim people come to ask us about tabs. The answer is that Emacs doesn't really use tabs in the same way Vim does, but eyebrows is the best way to get close, I feel. So if you press space capital W, it shows you here down here a list of workspaces, and you can press 2 to make a new one. You can press H and L to browse through them. So let me make a few here like this, and you can see that at 1 you have these windows, and in 2 to 5 you just have this window. So this saves the window configuration basically. You can press R to change the names. Hi there. So now you see number 2 is called hi there, and if I am in number 2 you will see here the name of that workspace in the mode line. And if I go to number 1 you can see here and here it's workspace number 1. So this is handy if you like tabs, and the GT and G capital T bindings from Vim, they work with eyebrows as well. Um, Let me see, the Git layer, you will want to have that if you work with Git. It introduces under space GS the Magit application, which is a package for working with Git. It can do a lot of different things: cherry picking, diffing, fetching, you name it. Magit can do it. It's really impressive, but I can't spend a lot of time showing you how that works here. Uh, just have a look. Trust me, it is amazing. Um, iBuffer. It's really nice if you find yourself a little bit cramped down here in uh, in uh, in Helm. You can press space B, capital B, to open iBuffer, which is a really nice list of all your buffers, and it's very easy to look at. It has nice organization and so on. My BB iBuffer layer contains my configuration for iBuffer. It took a little bit of work to set up, but I think it's useful for many different people, so you can have a look at that if you like. Org mode, right there. Um, I can't show you org mode right now, basically for the same reason I can't show you Magit. It's huge, it's amazing. It will have to be in a different video, but please check it out. Ranger, this is the layer that produces the file tree navigator under space AR. This is Ranger. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm doing something wrong here. It looks a little bit differently. Let me see. yeah, this is what it looks like by default. I'm not sure why it looks differently. Um, I'll have to look at that later. But it shows you basically um, here a list of files and folders in a given folder, and this is the parent folder. And then you can browse through the files here. It shows you here on the right a preview, and you can navigate with J and K. You can press L to enter a folder, H to go back. You can press YY to copy a file, and then I can go into themes here and PP to paste, or I can press capital D to delete it. So this is a really nice file manager with a Vim-like interface. I like it a lot. And like mentioned, there's also Deer, which is more like a single window instance of Ranger. Um, so that's really handy. That's on SpaceHD. That's a Deer. Um, Another layer, semantic. If you like the SpaceSL function to show the definitions in a file, you will want to enable the semantic layer. It makes it a whole lot better. Smex, that's my command list here. It's usually provided by Helm, but I like Smex better, so that's what the Smex layer does. It's a whole lot faster than Helm, uh, and yeah, basically just a lot nicer. Unimpaired, it's better described by the README. Let me see here. It basically introduces a lot of these key bindings that begin with either of the square brackets. So I have bracket space to insert white empty lines like this. I have bracket L to go to the next or the previous error if I have syntax checking enabled. And yeah, basically cycle through windows, cycle through buffers, and so on. It's a really nice layer. Um, just a few bindings to make your life nicer, you know. The fast layer, if you have installed fast on your system, this layer is really nice. You can do FA space FA S to search for example Emacs, and then it shows me any path that I've been to with Emacs in the name. Um, and this collects information not just from Emacs but also from just regular usage in the shell. So if you use it for a while, this becomes extremely complete. You can use space FAD to search only for folders, or you can use space FAF to search only for files, or as I said, space FAS to search for both. And finally, I want to point out the shell layer. This brings up basically pop-up shells if you hit space apostrophe here. It has a variable called the shell default shell. You should set it to whichever shell you prefer to use. There are a few, but I like to use eShell. Um, basically your options are whether you want to use eShell or a terminal emulator. Emacs comes with a few terminal emulators, and many of them are really good, but they're not the real thing. Uh, your experience may vary, basically. Um, on the other hand, eShell is a fully fledged shell, and not just a terminal emulator, which means it sidesteps many of those compatibility issues that plague the other terminal emulators. So that's why I use that. If I need an actual terminal emulator with my set shell on it, I just use that, and I don't bother about doing that in Emacs. And anyway, eShell, uh, it works well for many things that I want to use it for. cat works, cd works, ls works, and so on. So that's nice. That basically brings me to the end of the list that I had prepared here of features that I want to highlight. I hope this video has helped you out. You may have found some features that you want to use in your workflow, or maybe you're just curious about SpaceMax and you now want to try it out. Um, Whichever is true, I hope to see you around in the SpaceMax chat room, where if you have any questions, we will help you out. And if you have any other things that you want me to look at to record a new video about, then just drop a comment and I'll have a look. Thanks.